Picture this. It's 3 a.m. The world has gone quiet. Your phone lies face down on the nightstand, its notifications silenced. The house breathes around you in that peculiar way empty spaces do. And there you are, just you, sitting in the darkness with your thoughts. How does that image make you feel? If your first instinct is discomfort, a slight tightening in your chest, you're not alone. Most of us have been conditioned to fear this moment, this encounter with ourselves in pure, unfiltered solitude. But what if I told you that this fear, this desperate need to fill every silence with noise, every empty space with another person, is the very thing standing between you and the life you're meant to live? Today we're going on a journey, not to a distant place, but to the most unexplored territory of all the landscape of your own company. We're going to discover why the art of being alone isn't about isolation or loneliness, but about something far more profound: the courage to meet yourself without disguise. The great deception. Let me tell you about Maria. She's 34, lives in a beautiful apartment downtown, has a successful career, and hasn't been single for more than 3 months since she was 16. Maria jumps from relationship to relationship with the precision of someone crossing a river on stepping stones, never pausing long enough to notice she's afraid of the water. When her last relationship ended, something interesting happened. For the first time in nearly 2 decades, Maria found herself truly alone. No dating apps to swipe through, no weekend plans revolving around someone else's schedule. It's just Maria, her apartment, and the terrifying question: who am I when no one is watching? Maria's story isn't unique. It's the story of millions of us who have been taught that solitude is a problem to be solved, a void to be filled, a temporary state before we return to the real business of being coupled. But here is what no one tells you. This belief that you re-incomplete without another is perhaps the most destructive lie our culture has ever sold us. Think about it. From the moment we're old enough to understand stories, we're fed a narrative. The princess needs rescuing. The hero needs a love interest. The movie ends when the couple kisses. Even our language betrays this bias. We don't say someone chose to be single. We say they're still single, as if they're stuck in some waiting room of life. This narrative runs so deep that we've internalized it as biological truth. We believe that seeking partnership is as natural as breathing, as essential as eating. But what if it's not? What if this desperate need for constant companionship is actually learned? Behavior, cultural programming that we've mistaken for instinct. The paradox of connection here is where it gets interesting. The very thing we think will complete us, constant connection with others, often prevents us from forming the most important connection of all, the one with ourselves. I want you to imagine your mind as a deep, still lake. When you're constantly surrounded by others, constantly responding to their needs, their opinions, their expectations, it's as if people are continuously throwing stones into this lake. The surface becomes choppy, agitated. You can't see clearly to the bottom where your deepest truths lie. But when you're truly alone, not just physically, but mentally and emotionally alone, the surface begins to still. And in that stillness, you can finally see through to the depths of who you actually are. This isn't some mystical concept, it's psychology. Your brain, when freed from the constant task of social navigation, begins to operate differently. The default mode network, the part of your brain that activates during rest, starts to weave together memories, process experiences, and form new insights. This is where creativity lives. This is where authentic self-knowledge is born. But we're so afraid of this stillness that we fill every moment with distraction. We'd rather scroll through other people's lives than sit with our own thoughts. We'd rather have shallow conversations than deep silence. We've become strangers to ourselves in our desperate attempt to never be alone with who we are. The prison of people-pleasing. Let me share another story. David is 42 and considers himself happily married. But if you look closely at his life, you'll notice something peculiar. Every decision he makes, from what restaurant to choose for dinner, to which career path to pursue, is filtered through one question: what will she think? David has become so skilled at anticipating his wife's preferences that he's forgotten his own exist. When asked what he genuinely wants, he looks puzzled, as if the question is in a foreign language. Says spent 20 years of marriage becoming an expert on someone else's inner world, while becoming a stranger to his own. This is what happens when we outsource our identity to our relationships. We become like those GPS devices that only know where they are in relation to satellites. Remove the signal, and they're completely lost. The cruel irony is that David thinks this makes him a better husband. He believes that love means the erasure of self, that devotion requires the sacrifice of individuality. But what he's actually done is created a relationship with a ghost, the ghost of who he used to be, or who he might have become. His wife, meanwhile, fell in love with someone who no longer exists. She's now in a relationship with her own reflection, and neither of them realizes how lonely that is. This is the hidden tragedy of our culture's relationship obsession. In our rush to avoid being alone, we often end up more isolated than ever alone together, surrounded by people who don't really know us, because we've forgotten how to know ourselves. The archaeology of self-true solitude is like archaeological work. When you first begin spending time alone with yourself, freely alone, without books or music or screens to serve as buffers, you start digging through layers of accumulated identity. The top layer is who you think you should be. This is the version of yourself that's been sculpted by years of other people's expectations, society's demands, family pressure, and cultural conditioning. This version is polished, acceptable, predictable.
Ow.
Dig deeper, and you hit who you think you are. This layer contains your conscious beliefs about yourself, your self-concept. The story you tell about your own personality and preferences. It's more authentic than the surface layer, but it's still heavily influenced by external feedback. But if you keep digging, if you have the courage to sit in the discomfort of not knowing, you eventually reach bedrock, who you actually are. This is the self that exists independent of other people's opinions, beyond the roles you play, beneath the masks you wear. This is your essence, raw, unfiltered, and often surprising even to you. Most people never reach this layer because the excavation is uncomfortable. It requires sitting with uncertainty, facing parts of yourself you've ignored or denied, acknowledging dreams you've buried, and truths you've avoided. But here's what's extraordinary. This deepest self, the one you can only meet in solitude, is the source of everything valuable you have to offer the world. Your creativity springs from here. Your authentic compassion grows from this soil. Your genuine capacity for love not need disguised as love, but real love flows from this wellspring. The creativity of emptiness. There's a beautiful concept in Japanese aesthetics called ma, the pregnant pause, the meaningful emptiness, the space between things that gives them shape and significance. Without ma, music becomes noise, art becomes clutter, and life becomes a frantic sprint from one distraction to the next. Solitude is the ma of human existence. Think about the greatest innovations, the most moving art, the most profound insights in human history. They didn't emerge from crowded rooms or committee meetings. They came from minds that had learned to be comfortable in their own company, that had cultivated the capacity to sit with not knowing until something new could emerge. Einstein's theory of relativity didn't come from a brainstorming session. It came from long walks alone, from hours of solitary thought experiments, from a mind that had learned to wander without destination until it stumbled upon revolutionary insights. Virginia Woolf wrote about the necessity of a room of one's own, not just physical space, but psychological space, mental space, the sacred territory of the uninterrupted self. But we've become so afraid of emptiness that we've forgotten its creative power. We fill our calendars to avoid confronting the possibility that we might have nothing important to do. We surround ourselves with noise to avoid hearing what our inner voice might tell us, pack our lives with people to avoid the terrifying possibility that we might discover. We re-interesting company for ourselves. The paradox of love here, perhaps the most counterintuitive truth about solitude. Learning to be alone doesn't make you less capable of love, makes you more capable of authentic love. When you don't know how to be alone, every relationship becomes a rescue mission. You're not seeking a partner, you're seeking salvation. You're not offering love, you're offering a transaction. Please fill this void in me, and I'll be whatever you need me to be in return. This isn't love, it's mutual dependency disguised as romance. Real love requires two whole people choosing each other, not to half people trying to make a complete person. It requires the ability to say, I don't need you to survive, but I want you in my life because of who you are, not because of what you can do for my loneliness. This distinction between need and choice is everything. When you learn to be genuinely comfortable alone, you transform from someone who needs love to someone who can offer it freely. You stop looking for someone to complete you and start looking for someone whose completeness complements your own. The social pressure machine, of course. None of this happens in a vacuum. We live in a culture that has turned relationship status into a form of social currency. Being coupled is seen as evidence of your worth, your attractiveness, your basic functionality as a human being. The questions start early. Do you have a boyfriend? When are you getting married? When are you having kids? Each question carries an implicit judgment that your life doesn't quite count until you've paired off. That your happiness is somehow less valid if it's not shared. That your accomplishments are diminished if there's no one to witness them. This pressure is particularly intense for women, who are often taught that their value lies in their ability to attract and keep a partner. But men face it too, in different forms, the expectation that they should be providers, protectors, that their worth is measured by their ability to get and keep a woman. These messages are so pervasive that even when we intellectually reject them, they continue to operate in our subconscious, creating a low-level anxiety about our single status, a constant background hum of incompleteness. But what if we could turn down that volume? What if we could see these messages for what they are, not truths about human nature? Social constructs that serve certain economic and cultural purposes but not necessarily our individual well-being. The economics of loneliness. Think about who benefits when you believe you're incomplete without a partner. The wedding industry, worth billions of dollars. It's a diamond industry built on the idea that love requires expensive symbols. The greeting card industry, monetizing emotional expression. The restaurant industry, with its premium pricing for romantic experiences. Even streaming services know that coupled people are more profitable than single people. They are more likely to stay subscribed. It's more predictable in their viewing habits, less likely to take risks that might disrupt their shared accounts. Your insecurity about being alone isn't just a personal struggle, it's a market opportunity for countless industries. But beyond the economic implications, there's something deeper at work. A society of people who are comfortable being alone is a society of people who are harder to control. When you don't need constant external validation, you're less susceptible to advertising that plays on your insecurities. When you're not desperately seeking approval, you're more likely to think independently, to question social norms, to live according to your own values rather than society's expectations. A person who has learned to be alone is a person who has learned to think for themselves. And that, perhaps, is the most threatening thing of all to a culture built on conformity and consumption. The art of sacred solitude. So how do you learn this art? How do you transform from someone who fears being alone to someone who treasures solitude? It starts small. Maybe it's taking a walk without your phone. Maybe it's sitting in a cafe alone, not reading, not scrolling, just observing. Maybe it's eating a meal in silence, really tasting your food instead of distracting yourself from the act of nourishment. At first, it will feel uncomfortable. Your mind will race. You'll feel the urge to reach for stimulation, to fill the space with something. Anything. This is normal. You're essentially detoxing from a lifetime of avoidance. But if you stay with it, something shifts. The discomfort begins to ease. You start noticing things you've never seen before. The way light moves across your wall. The rhythm of your own breathing. The texture of your thoughts when they're not competing with external noise. You begin to realize that you're more interesting than you thought. That your inner world is vast and complex and worthy of exploration. That the conversation you've been avoiding, the one with yourself, is actually the most fascinating dialogue you could ever have. The deepening, as you become more comfortable with solitude, something profound happens. You start to distinguish between loneliness and aloneness. Loneliness is the pain of being disconnected from others. Aloneness is the joy of being connected to yourself. You realize that some of your deepest moments of loneliness happened when you were surrounded by people sitting in a crowded room, feeling completely unseen, lying next to someone who didn't really know you, performing a version of yourself that felt hollow and false. And some of your most connected moments happened when you were alone, walking in nature, and feeling part of something larger, creating something that felt authentically yours, or simply sitting in the quiet satisfaction of your own company. This is when you understand that the quality of your relationships is directly related to the quality of your relationship with yourself. When you know yourself deeply, you can show up authentically with others. When you're comfortable in your own skin, you stop seeking relationships to fill emotional gaps and start seeking them to share your wholeness. The ripple effect here asks what no one tells you about learning to be alone. It doesn't just change your relationship with yourself, it changes every relationship you have. When you stop needing constant validation, people around you can stop performing and start being real. When you're not desperately seeking approval, conversations become more honest. When you're comfortable with silence, others feel permission to share their deeper thoughts. You become what psychologists call a secure base. Someone who is so grounded in themselves that others feel safe to explore their own authenticity around you. Your comfort with solitude becomes a gift you offer to everyone you meet. And paradoxically, this is when you become most attractive to others. Not because you need them, but because you don't. Not because you're trying to impress them, but because you're genuinely curious about who they are. Not because you're performing a role, but because you're showing up as yourself. The fear of missing out, but what about connection? What about community? What about the fear that by choosing solitude, you'll miss out on the richness of shared experience? This is perhaps the deepest fear about embracing aloneness, that we'll become isolated. It's cut off from the human experience, that we'll trade connection for independence and end up empty. But this fear is based on a false choice. Learning to be alone doesn't mean rejecting connection. It means approaching connection from a place of strength rather than need, choice rather than desperation, authenticity rather than performance. When you're comfortable being alone, you can be selective about your connections. You can seek relationships that nourish rather than drain you, that challenge you to grow rather than enable you to hide, that celebrate your authentic self rather than requiring you to pretend to be someone else. You realize that a few deep, honest relationships are worth more than 100 shallow ones. That quality of connection matters more than quantity. That being alone is better than being with people who don't really see you. The mystery of solitude, there's something mysterious that happens in deep solitude, something that can't be explained, but only experienced. Call it meditation, call it presence, call it simply being. There are moments when the boundary between self and world becomes permeable, when you feel connected to something larger than your individual identity. These moments of transcendence, of unity, of what some call cosmic consciousness, seem to arise most readily in solitude. Not because you're isolated from the world, but because you've become quiet enough to hear the world speaking. In these moments, you realize that aloneness and connection aren't opposites. They're different faces of the same truth. When you're truly alone with yourself, you're also most connected to the universal human experience, to the natural world, to the mystery of existence itself. The courage to be, perhaps the deepest gift of solitude, is that it teaches you what the philosopher Paul Tillich called the courage to be. The courage to exist as yourself, to take up space in the world, is to trust your own experience, even when it differs from others, to live from your own center, rather than in reaction to external pressures. This courage isn't loud or aggressive. It's quiet, steady, unshakable. It's the courage that allows you to say no to relationships that don't serve you, to choose quality over quantity, to trust your own intuition even when others disagree. It's the courage that allows you to create rather than consume, to lead rather than follow, to love without losing yourself in the process. The path forward. So where does this leave us? If you've listened this far, something in you is already stirring, already curious about what it might feel like to befriend your own solitude. The path isn't about becoming a hermit or rejecting human connection. It's about developing the capacity to be alone, so that you can choose to be with others from a place of wholeness rather than need. It's about learning to enjoy your own company so much that others feel privileged to share it. It's about becoming so comfortable in your own skin that you stop needing others to validate your existence. Start small. Take a walk without your phone. Eat a meal in silence. Sit with your thoughts for 10 minutes without trying to solve anything or distract yourself from anything. The discomfort, the restlessness, the urge to fill the space with activity, these are all normal. They're signs that you're touching something real, something that's been buried under years of avoidance. Stay with it. Breathe through it. Remember that learning to be alone is not about becoming lonely, it's about becoming free. The sacred return. And here's the beautiful truth that emerges from this journey. When you learn to be genuinely comfortable alone, when you discover the richness of your own company. When you stop needing others to complete you, that's when you become capable of the deepest, most authentic connections. Because you're no longer relating from emptiness to emptiness, need to need, fear to fear. You're relating from fullness to fullness, choice to choice, love to love. You bring your whole self to every interaction. You seek relationships that honor rather than diminish your authenticity. You love without losing yourself, care without becoming codependent, connect without surrendering your center. This is the paradox and the promise of solitude. In learning to be alone, you become capable of never being truly lonely again. In befriending yourself, you become a better friend to everyone else. In choosing solitude, you choose the kind of connections that actually connect. The journey to authentic relationship with others begins with authentic relationship with yourself. And that journey, beautiful as it is difficult, sacred as it is challenging, begins in the quiet moment when you decide you're worth getting to know. In the silence of your own company, you discover not emptiness, but fullness. Not isolation, but connection to everything that matters. Not loneliness, but love, beginning with love for the extraordinary person you discover yourself to be when no one else is looking. The art of being alone is ultimately the art of being alive. Fully, authentically, courageously alive. And that, perhaps, is the most radical act of all. So tonight, when the world goes quiet and you find yourself alone with your thoughts, don't reach for your phone. Don't fill the silence with noise. Instead, sit with the mystery of your own existence. Listen to what your heart has been trying to tell you. Meet yourself perhaps for the first time without apology or pretense. The most important relationship of your life is waiting.